Hello and welcome to our first artist talk of BN 2023. Two more will follow tomorrow and on Thursday, same place, same time. You are all kindly invited to join us again. My name is Sanja and I'll be talking to our guests, amazing artists and great thinkers also. Textile Art Biennial is about sustainability, heritage and preservation. It originates from Kranj and keeps on growing. So this year, events and exhibitions are held also in Škofja Loka, Jesenice, and Nova Gorica. All about sustainability, heritage, and preservation is also our guest artist today. Her work in flux is exhibited in Škrlovec Tower Gallery in Kranj. She is an internationally acclaimed artist, researcher, teacher, who has a BA from the University of Nigeria, an MA and MFA from the University of Iowa, and a PhD from Monash University in Australia. With great honor, we welcome Nnenna Okore. Hello.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you, Sanja.
So, born in Australia, grew up in Nigeria, now living in United States. Where have we found you today?
Well, yes, that is all true. And right now I'm calling out of Los Cabos, Mexico, where I am having spending some time with my family. But I'm very much influenced by all the places that I have lived or been throughout my years as an artist. My career as an artist started when I was very young in Nigeria. And I've always been interested in the environment. I've always been interested in ways to form deep connections with the outdoors, the great outdoors, and all the peculiarities that it has. And that is what drives me as an artist. That is what drives my work.
You have a PhD in fine arts as of recently, so congratulations.
Thank you.
The title of your thesis is Practice, Provocation and Participation, Thinking with Waste. What was your research focused on? Was it just a summation of your work to this point, or did you pose another challenge for you for your PhD?
Thank you, Saya, for that question. So my PhD was focused on trying to bring together teaching and making and thinking about environmental crisis related to waste. And the reason why it was of importance to me is because I was really reflecting deeply on how we can be creative in sustainable ways, how we can be thinking of this very heavy issue of global warming and climate change, environmental disasters that are affecting our planet. And I've always been, for a long time, I've been torn because when we as artists make work, obviously we generate a lot of waste in the process, whether we're working with, and we work with a lot of synthetic materials, by the way. So that is also another way that we contribute to the carbon footprints that affect us with regard to climate change. And so I was really thinking about how I, as an artist, can practice, how I can get people to think about these issues, and also how I can get people to participate in the conversations around climate change, so that we can be aware that there is a process through which we can be creative, but also contribute to the solutions of climate change, not just speak about it, not just make work that is visual and addressing the issues, but also the process by which we make the work also reflects that we're thinking about it. So that was sort of what drove me towards my practice as in the PhD field. And my PhD, I consider it to be interdisciplinary because I was working as a pedagogue, a teacher, and also as an artist, and trying to straddle the two. In the process, I developed a way of making art sustainably, or rather maybe ecologically as well. And that idea was to find waste materials around us, especially food waste. That is a huge problem for the world, and see a way that I can tap into that as a means for making art, as a means for speaking about the problem, and as a means for contributing to the solution. So that was what sort of promoted me or provoked me to work in this direction. And I developed or extended on an idea. There's a material called bioplastic, which is where you use organic materials, especially from food, and maybe food that is not even wanted or used, to then make materials for art. And it's a quasi plastic material. So it ends up looking like plastic, but it's food, and it can degenerate and decompose and be put back into nature. I had to do a lot of research and reading about waste and what different researchers and thinkers had, written about or said about waste, and the problems that waste pose to the world. And one of the books I was reading was Cradle to Cradle, and it's by Michael McDonald. And he was basically just posing a challenge to the world to think about how we can live eco-efficiently and eco-effectively, which means that we can be like nature, whereby the leaves, the trees, for instance, produce a lot of waste through dropping of their leaves on the ground, or twigs on the ground, and those leaves would ultimately, even though they're wasted, they ultimately regenerate and help to nourish the earth again. So how can we make waste that nourishes the earth, or that this doesn't pose danger or risk to the earth? That was sort of my question, my research question. And the way that I decided to tackle it was, one, to bring people into the equation, to have people talking about it, to maybe invite people into my studio so that they can participate in what I do, which is work with this organic waste, and they can learn that there's a way out, there's a way we can, make from what we have, like plants. We can bring children into it, and they can play with these materials and make art. So art doesn't always have to be synthetic. It doesn't always have to be artificial. It can be from these very available everyday waste that we produce, especially the organic waste that end up in landfills that are useless to the landfill, and also that create a lot of carbon emissions. So that was, I think, in a nutshell, that was what I was trying to do, trying to get catalyze people having dialogue, conversations, art making, awareness about the waste issues that we have in the world, and how we might change direction, change course. And I know it's not very popular, because when you work with these kinds of organic material, it means that you have things that would not last. It means that you have materials that would ultimately degenerate. And the world that we live in today, there's a lot of emphasis on making to last, making not sustainability, but necessarily, but making things that would be durable over the course of time. But my argument is that, why should we focus on that durability, or that at the cost of the environment? And also, why can't we think of our art like we think of our bodies? Our bodies age, our bodies decay when it's dead, and re-nourishes the environment. Why can't our art also do the same? So that drove me to creating these bodies of work that were largely ephemeral. I would make them, I would put them in the outdoors, I would display them with the intention of them not lasting. I put them out for the birds to eat, for the animals to eat. And like the piece that I created for the BN exhibition, you can see that it's all food and cheesecloth. So it's very ephemeral. It's temporary. It wouldn't last very long. The color might change over time, and for me, that's very satisfactory, because I'm making something that I think is very aesthetic. But at the same time, it causes us to really stop and think about what our actions are doing, and how we are making a difference. Thank you.
I was thinking about that because a lot of artists want their work to last,
Yeah,
to survive for centuries, and maybe to be preserved for future generations. Um, it's not that easy to say goodbye to your work, to just leave it to rot, or to be digested. You have to make a mind shift. As you
absolutely.
said, to view your work as a part of a cycle, like the tree you mentioned. You create something, and initially it becomes a fertilizer for new life. It's a very, very noble aspect and a view on life, I think. How can we translate this to people to really make them understand how important it is that we sustain these cycles and not pollute the environment? Can an artist make the change, even if
I
your own community of creative people? This is a massive task to to say to someone, change your acrylics to something more environmentally friendly. Then a person has to completely change his view of art and his work. Um, how much of an impact can one person really make? What is the reach of one person trying to change minds and world?
That is a really, really challenging question. And I think there is no simple answer to this problem. Uh, One way that I have thought about breaking the cycle is to generate dialogue and to energize people to see these things. I think that even though many artists are sympathetic towards the environmental cause, maybe there isn't enough dialogue around it, especially in the art schools and the art academy, right? I've not I can't recall having many opportunities to really sit down with different artists and different artist community to talk about this problem. I mean, we talk about it in passing. We express our frustration about, oh, there's no material to use that is sustainable. We have no choice. We just have to use what we have to use. But there isn't a deep, like, concerted effort to say, okay, what are some of the alternatives? What are some of the ways that we can break away from the mode of using these very toxic materials? Can we, revert, or can we move on to other kinds of things? What other opportunity, what research is being done to create alternatives, that kind of thing. So I feel like the problem or the conversation is to start at home with artists. And I started to do that, especially during my PhD period. I had many opportunities and many workshop sessions where I was addressing my peers and contemporaries, to speak to them about what the alternatives were. And it included things like, uh, just think about the toxicity, think about the carbon footprint. These days, some scientists have developed like what they call the carbon footprint calculator, where you can actually plug in your data about what materials you're using, how you're moving them around, all the sort of processes that are involved, and it pulls up for you a carbon emission report of how much your work is contributing to this problem. And so I think if there's a way that this conversation can really start in the artist community, and people start to really think about what their actions are doing, because it's kind of removed from the front view, like it's in the periphery somewhere, nagging, but it's not really like in the fore. And I think that if we as artists can have these conversations, really think about it more intentionally. How is my work affecting? What kind of carbon footprint am I generating through my process? And I'm not necessarily arguing or suggesting that we should abandon all of the beautiful experimental ways of making art that allows for ambition to exist, that allows for new sort of creativity and breaking grounds. I think what I'm suggesting is maybe we should just rethink some of the processes we're using, rethink some of the ways where expending our natural resources, or even the kinds of materials we're using, and how we might make a change, whether it is in, okay, I'm no longer going to use this kind of synthetic material, I'm going to use something natural instead, somewhere, someplace. Like for instance, for me, when I was in my undergraduate years, I used to use canvas for my paintings and oils and all of that. But because of this natural environmental problems, I scaled back and started to use like jute, for instance, and use cheesecloth and use fabrics, and just to kind of like take away the plastic element from my work of using canvas, which sometimes it has a lot of synthetic materials, depending on the kind of canvas you're using. Just things like that, small things. I mean, I feel that when we all work collectively to make an impact, even if it's small changes in what we do, that altogether those little actions can become big actions. But when we kind of like dismiss it, which is something I saw along the lines of my research, where artists would be like, "Oh, we don't know what to do, we can't change our ways, it's hopeless." And you kind of get into the space where you lock your mind and there is no further way to break the cycle. And one other thing I also found was that art can also be very experiential. Uh, if we could also change our mindset that the beauty of art is not just struck on materiality or making things that are physical, but that there can be an experiential element to it, or participatory element to it, where the art is really about engaging with people, having conversations, building things out of nothing. And as such, changing the parameters or the trajectory of how we see art. I think that's a really big step for me, at least. And the other institution to blame, some of the bigger art organizations, the museums and the galleries and all of that, who have really, really not helped, because they insist on supporting only these durable, long term kinds of art and ambitious kind of art. I think there also has to be a shift in mindset with these institutions, art institutions, that art can be really about communication, about play, about experience, and those kinds of things, about participatory social art kind of networks. I think that would help, because if we can make art less about physicality, materiality, to more of spatial, experiential, and also conversations and dialogues and social actions and things like that, I think that would go a long way. So there are many alternatives, and you're right. It is a very uphill task to change artists' mind and tell them, the things you love working with are not very, very helpful to the environment. Change course. I think it's more persuasive if you can say, let's look at some other alternatives or some other ways that we can inject more sustainable practice into how we make art, so that it can procure less impact on the environment, if you will, or sort of like be thinking about what your work is doing and how in the long term it's affecting the planet.
Well, you also changed course from painting to sculpture. What prompted that change for you? Was it waste back then, or did it enter your art later?
Well, it was a little bit of both. I think that, first of all, I was not very. I got very bored early on with painting, because I felt like the four-cornered surface was very limiting for me. I wanted to be expressive. I wanted to materially explore in a way that painting, I felt, was limiting to me. And so I pivoted to sculpture, because it allowed me to add a three-dimensionality to it, to work with materials, to touch things, to put together things in very creative ways. The main reason I moved to sculpture was because I was interested in working with natural found elements. And those elements included leaves, my jute material, sticks, clay. It was yes, it wasn't at the very top of my mind in terms of like thinking about environmental waste, but I had a consciousness about it. And the materials that I used were largely critiquing or visualizing some of the problems, environmental problems we had. Like I was making works that spoke to the environment and the natural resources that we have, the landscape and things like that. So at the back of my mind, there was some consciousness around it. But I think as I matured in my practice, I became a lot more focused on this issue of the environmental problems around waste, because I felt like, what are we doing? How are we producing as artists? And at the end of my works, I would have a whole like backlog of wasted things, and I would store them often because I don't want to throw them away. I feel like I have to reuse them, and I started to notice that even in my classroom, when you teach technical art or this technical process in art with plaster, with different kinds of materials, metals, wood, some of these things are not recyclable. And so keeping tab or keeping track of the amount of material waste that was generated, because every day the janitors had to come in and clear this waste and put them in big trucks and take them to the landfill. I kept thinking, think about the days that these wastes are collected. Think about the weeks, think about the months and the years of all of these collections from across the world, from all the different art schools. That is a ton of waste that we are, producing as artists. The artist world is actually contributing to this problem in maybe in a very minute way. I mean, if you look at it across board, across industries and stuff, it might not be as significant as some of the bigger industrial waste that is being produced in the manufacturing sector. However, we are part of it. And why isn't it at the center of how we're making? Aren't they courses that are being offered to say, okay, we can think sustainably. Let's make art in this different way. There has to be a mind shift for it to change. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but there has to be a mind shift that would now build a culture, a visual culture that would allow us to really propagate the idea and be making with awareness. Because I think that's important, right? So back to your question, I think it was just that drive to really connect back with the environment and to be thinking about sustainability and thinking about climate change and thinking about ways that to draw attention to the issue. That those were things that really drew me into sculpture, and a lot of my works were very centered around these materials that I spoke about. Mostly, I was collecting paper because I felt like paper is such a huge part of the natural waste. The trees are being decimated to make paper, and paper is so accessible and so wasted. It's one of the biggest waste in the world. And so I was recycling them, repurposing them for my art. I was collecting sticks and combining the materials, because I was also interested in the marriage and the possibilities around combining materials. So those were all things that kind of drove me towards sculpture, and it gave me a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah, you do use different materials, but they're all biodegradable mostly. And your work is very diverse, but carries an air of continuity. I think very intricate, woven, but always reminiscent of something organic. Sometimes, I don't know, cell-like or very floral. It's hard to escape the notion that nature is your great inspiration. But do you also, it seems kind of humanity is outside of your work, or maybe we're only the waste producers that provide you the materials to praise the nature. This is some kind of feeling I got. Maybe it's completely wrong, but can you talk maybe about your inspiration in the core besides the materials? Does all your inspiration spring from material, or it begins with another spark and then you go to the material? How does it work for you?
Well, I think it's interwoven. I think it's interwoven. So I'm African. I have an African heritage, for instance. I'm from Nigeria by origin, and a lot of the Igbo philosophy. Igbo is my particular cultural group and cultural heritage. Has a lot to do with the natural environment and sort of the synthesis between uh, the the land and the body, the natural world, and sort of how we are interconnected with it. And I think that's the core basis of my philosophy. It sits at the background in everything I do. I'm always thinking about nature and the connections and the cycles around the human existence and its connection to the uh, the natural world. You know, because we're born into the world, and we exist and intermingle with the trees and the land and the animals, and those entities have a direct connection to how we form our thinking as Igbo people. And when we eventually live through the land and interact with all these different elements, we pass on, right? And our bodies return to the earth. And from there, our bodies become one with the spirits of the earth, and our spirits become ancestors and kind of guide the things that happen within the planetary ecosystem. So I think it starts from there. And then second, the other connection that I would say that I have to humanity is that my works are always thinking of ways, or in my practice, I'm always thinking of ways uh, to engage and engender conversation, dialogue through practice. And so I'm always chatting, I'm always pulling people into my work, either by involving them in the process. That has always been there ever since, even when I was much younger in my practice. I would bring people into the process to my studio, and I would teach them my process, and I would have conversations about it. So my work is not really diverse from human interactions, or maybe not humans. I'm not really making work about human subjects directly, but it's all intertwined in my mind, because it is those conversations that happen, humans, that actually inspires me to think deeply into this problem and to think about ways that I can further engage experience. And even in my installations, when I create works that are spatial, a lot of my installations are very spatial. That means that people can interact with it. I do encourage a lot of physical interactions. I'm not one of those who would say, don't touch the work. We just look at it like the museums would say. I'm all about touch it, feel it, smell it, put it around you, get a sense of it, because I think that is what would sensitize us to become much more aware of the materiality of this problem, and maybe even kind of remind us of where we're going. So one of the shows I had prior to Influx is called Making Kin. I had made a lot of the elements within the installation with bioplastic, and I had also made small pieces of bioplastic that the audience could take away with them. I had the whole exhibition was about touching, feeling, engaging, interacting, having conversations. And so I had people come by and really engaging with these materials. And then I had groups of people also come and have conversations with the work, like interact with it, dissect it, get to understand it a little better. And at the end, they would take away a piece of this material with them. And I said, take it into the world, experience it. And whatever you decide to do with it is fine. If you decide, okay, I'm going to toss it into nature afterwards, I'm very happy with that. If you decide I'm going to keep it, that's great. If you decide I'm going to make an artwork with it, that's great. So it's my own way of saying, I want that kind of engagement, very deep engagement that doesn't just end with the experience of seeing the work or engaging with it in the gallery, but then it goes a little further, right, into the world, where people, when they pick up these pieces, they would have conversations with their families and friends, and that for me propagates a longevity around the work as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sanja, but yes.
I think it does. Can you tell us more about bioplastics? You actually make it yourself. How does that work? How much research did you do? Um, can anyone make bioplastics?
Oh, anyone can make bioplastic. There are many resources out there. So it's not unique to me. I'm not the first person to come up with a concept, although I have a recipe that I would suggest is unique to me. But the concept is basically just taking uh, organic materials, and when I say organic materials, I mean food materials in particular, or plant-based materials in particular, and finding ways of transforming them into materials that can be used as alternative products for our daily usage. So today, I mean, scientists and artists are working together to work with the mushrooms, for instance, and they're creating packaging out of mushrooms that are homegrown, and they're very durable, and they do all the work that plastic, packaging could do. But for me, the bioplastic that I'm making is usually generated from my own waste. So at home in my kitchen, I would store all of my expired fruits, like how you buy berries and things, and at times at the end of the life cycle, it starts to rot and all of that. So I can't throw them away. I just store them. I store them over several months until they build up to. I mean, I don't have the space to do composting. That would have been another alternative for me, but because I couldn't accommodate composting in my life, I decided I was going to use the waste that I could attribute to composting to make my work. And so I would store my banana peels, I would store my orange peels, like those kinds of fruit waste or food waste that are even useless to the human body, right? We can't ingest them because they're not something that is easy to ingest. So I store them, and I then use them to I blend it separately. I blend them separately. I add other organic materials like cornstarch, like glycerin, like vinegar to deter
Mold.
bacterial or growth, yeah, exactly, molds and things like that. And then I just puree them together, I liquefy them, and I make my plastic from there. I kind of spread it out, and when it dries, I can peel it out like plastic, and it becomes very flexible. But I've over the years I've learned to I've sort of chained it and found a very beautiful solution that allows me to get different types of textures, different types of qualities of the bioplastic, and I can now manipulate it in my own way to make it do interesting things visually. So it's not just about creating the material and looking at it, but also managing it in ways that creates really interesting outcomes. So the bioplastic is really very plastic-like in material in nature. So that's one type of bioplastic. Then there are other types of bioplastic, like I mentioned earlier, like I forget the particular name of this mushroom. It's in my mind, but I can't remember it right now. But yeah, the mushroom, making bioplastics out of bacterial stimulated kinds of growth. Like I don't know if you know about the Scooby that's used to make
Kombucha.
drinks.
Yeah.
Kombucha, yes, exactly. The Scooby type of invention is many people have developed it now to create big, large types of material out of the bacteria, and those are also used to make different beautiful materials, bags and things. And for me, I'm also thinking of how the materials that I'm making can live in the world in a very functional way, because I think function is at the base of many of the designs we think about in our world. Like how can you use it? How can it be a very functional material? So I'm thinking maybe I can make functional materials like tents out of it, even if they don't last. But these people can be in it, they can experience it, and know that there is an alternative to the kinds of very destructive plastic materials that we have and we produce in the world. I mean, it's a capitalist system. The world has so much capitalism ruling it at the moment, so it's hard. It will be hard to pull back or to prevent, the production of these dangerous materials, but we just have to keep talking about it and keep enlightening people and keep steering people in that direction so they can know that there's a possibility of actually using alternate things, even if, like we've said they're not durable. In the end, wouldn't it be better for us to have a waste material that is made organically and we can put out in nature to deteriorate and become part of the environment and the ecosystem, and it's not dangerous to animals and to plants. That's sort of where my mindset is right now.
I was thinking another thing with respect that you're using, let's say, unconventional materials for your sculptures and work. What about unconventional exhibition places? You still exhibit in galleries, of course.
Yes.
Are you thinking maybe about also how can you put your works in other spaces?
Yes, indeed, I am. So one of the things that I found so exciting about doing a PhD with my bioplastic was that many of the things that I produced were exhibited in very, very weird spaces, especially outdoor spaces, because I was really interested in seeing what happens to this material when they're outdoors. And also, I was very interested in the idea of exhibiting for non-humans, right? That was one of my focus, looking at the non-human as also a part of the ecosystem that we have on this planet. So we shouldn't be always thinking about, oh, we're going to make artworks for ourselves, but also can we make artworks that are pleasing or at least would engage that community. And so I did produce a few works at the time that I had made outside. I've also elicited, and those works end up, being consumed by the natural environment, either through the elements or the animals in there would, decimate it, or the vegetative environment would swallow it up somehow and decompose it. So that was one way that I was thinking about, and I continue to think about, because I feel that there should be a shift in the culture in general, and we need to not necessarily move away from the white space, because the white space is a beautiful place to really display the eccentricities of the work or the materiality of the work, but we should be thinking of also other spaces. And I think your space is also particularly unique. It's a beautiful historic, I want to believe it's a historic space, and it just lends a whole lot of rawness to the piece in a way that a white space will not do. I've also been thinking about large installations. Of course, it would take me forever to create those, but what if I made an installation for a field, like the outdoor ed pieces, and have my work just put out and decay? And even though I have proposed it to a few organizations as a possibility, it's not the first idea that gets selected because it's ephemeral. It's very interesting how many institutions and organizations who are promoting environmental art are not really interested in work that would not last. They're interested in things that would stay and can be seen for over time. And I want to argue that it's antithetical to the process. We should be allowing the earth to drive what we're doing and not the other way around. But yes, I'm looking for opportunities. I'm looking for ways that I can engage nature more in my work. I'm looking for ways, and currently I do have a piece that is installed in the garden, but again, I was limited because we were looking for ways that work could be viewed over a period of a year, right? And so I had to still go back and use, synthetic things like metal frames and glass to kind of hold it in together so that it can last. But ideally, that would not be the first thing I would want to do. So I think it's slowly and surely it will get there, and we just need to continue to have these conversations. I thank you, Bien Exhibitions, for promoting this activity and for making it happen, because I think this is how we start, and slowly we can get there.
We are very, very happy we can host you. And I think the art happens during the process. It's not always about the end product, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, yes, indeed.
And on that note, how long does it take for you to create a piece? For instance, in Flux that we can see now in Kranj, what is the trajectory of such an artwork?
Well, typically I walk over long periods of time. Not because the work itself necessarily takes that much time, but I think the way that I typically work on my pieces is that I tend to start and stop and start and stop because I get a little bit burnt out if I don't stop. So I pivot and start to do something else, maybe another piece. I might be working on 3 or 4 pieces at the same time, in other words, so that I can have space to breathe, because I think it's so important for you to walk away from it and come back to it. And so if I were working straight on the piece, it might take me a month or so. If I were, say, every day from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, for instance, I was just working on it consistently, I might finish it quicker. But because I spread it over time, sometimes it takes me 6 to 8 months to produce one body of work, because I would be working concurrently on different things. But I think that Influx took about 6 months to create altogether, because one, there's a lot of drying time involved. The material itself comes very liquidy, and it takes time to dry, and you have to kind of manage the conditions, not put it in the sun, because if you put it in the sun, sometimes it dries too quickly and it cracks. So I have it indoors, but in a very well ventilated space, and so it slowly dries, and that sometimes drying can take up to a week. And because I'm working on very large surfaces of cheesecloth, I had to make them in small components and then dry them out very slowly. So it took me a while to complete. But I imagine that, much of the work that I do, um, it's time consuming, definitely. So I don't anticipate that they would be in a hurry. I take my time to do it, because I also need to think. I need to engage people in the process. I always have social engagements, because I'm trying to pick people's brains. I'm trying to uh, have new ideas injected into the process. I'm not just making out of what I think, but also what everybody else thinks. So it's a collective effort. So I think that's the process that I use. Am I missing anything? I mean, I've spoken about the bioplastic process itself, how I make it. So it's basically, I have a big blender and a big turner that helps me to blend it really as well as I can. I mean, I wish I could blend it a little bit finer so that you don't see some of the clumpy area, parts of the fruits, but it's all part of it. I enjoy the textures that it creates. It feels rough, and you can even smell it. I don't know if it's still smelling at the moment, but but you can smell the materials and the food in there.
And what is a lifetime of such a piece, for instance? Does it have an expiration date? Do you decide whether to store it properly, to preserve it, or maybe let it go?
That's a good question. So yeah, I've struggled with that a little bit, because it's a lot of work to produce such a large piece. But the smaller, there are some smaller works I've made that I've let go, because I know it's easy to let go of smaller things. But the larger pieces, because I do want them to have a little bit of a lifespan, for people to see them and for people to have engagements and conversations around them. I haven't quite disposed of them yet, but I have dreams of having maybe the financial support to create something really big that I would just put outdoors and just let go. There is a very liberating feeling that you get when you do that, because it means you're not holding on. It means that you're like nature. You can't hold on. You just have to let go. It is part of life. It's part of the process. And so for me, it's very important that I don't cling onto it too much. I let go, but I do also have to consider that the work needs to be seen and reflected upon. So I can't let go of everything. But yes, ultimately, it is my dream to be able to create something very ambitious and just let it go into nature.
You work now with bioplastics, but in the past, in the beginning, you also worked with regular plastic, with shopping
Yes.
bags, like a sort of commentary, I would say. In 2011, I think your piece, Bembe, is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's
Um,
correct.
you you used shopping bags and produced a beautiful piece that hung in a gallery. But even that one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it still um, falls into the category of non-friendly to the environment
Of course.
pieces. Um, that one is probably stored somewhere.
Oh yes, it is. I have a lot of things that like that are stored. And I would also like to comment that the idea behind that piece, those bags were actually collected recycled bags. So in America, unlike many I think many European countries have started to institute the idea of making people pay for their plastics or even try to reduce the amount of plastic bags we use for shopping. But America is still very widely popular to use to have shopping bags, lots and lots and lots of shopping bags handed to you as you're kind of purchasing commodities and items. And so I was actually collecting all of these plastic bags from friends and family and community. And when I had generated enough of them, I made this art just about uh, this nagging problem. So it was sort of like a visualization of the problem through this material, which is a big issue for us that is affecting our aquatic systems, our ecosystem, and all of that. Um, and so it wasn't so much about me going out and finding plastic and using it was more of making commentary that these are the kind of problems that are really destroying us. And Mbembe in Igbo means shadows. And so plastic is a big shadow that kind of falls something where it almost borders on our existence. And I wanted people to be aware of the significance because it's a beautiful material. It's very attractive. It holds things, but at the same time, it's almost like a curse to us because everywhere we go, it permeates everything we do. It's even in our bodies as microplastic. Um, so yes, I do make works like that I end up storing, and I think that was part of my conflict in my mind that I have all of these works that are made synthetically and I have to store these materials. And I'm supporting, in a way, indirectly supporting the manufacturing of these materials. But as an artist, we use what we have to kind of make a point and to make a statement. And when I think of the fact that I'm collecting these materials, pulling them away from the ocean, pulling them away from the landfill and making art and then having it be displayed and maybe hopefully collected and for the long term, for those who want to connect or for the long term, I feel like I'm helping. But at the same time, it is contrary sort of to the beliefs of what I'm trying to do. And I think increasingly I'm moving away from those kinds of materials because I want to be sustainable. I want to practice what I preach and not just make, yeah.
Yeah, it's a way better use for plastic bags to put them in an art piece than just tossing it in the trash. That
Absolutely.
I must agree. And on the note you just said, you practiced what you preach. You are also a lecturer, an educator. What do you preach to your students?
um, well, I preach sustainability. I preach awareness of environment as a catalyst for creating art. I preach dialogue and engagement and interactions in different ways and practice that is not necessarily always material based. So in my courses, for instance, we do, in every class that I teach, I have an environmental aspect to it. So we have to do one environmental theme. And in the performance class that I teach, it's about, using the body to illustrate these ideas and to cast new ways of thinking about this through performance. In the video art that I teach, similarly, I do have students kind of focus and project ideas about the catastrophic results of our actions. And similarly with my material-based classes, I do the same thing. I get students working with nature, working with fan materials, addressing this issue. So for me, it's about raising the awareness and having it be center stage in the way that we manufacture, the way that we produce art. So it's really important. I think that if there were one message that I like students to think about, it's like how can we leave this world better than how we found it? How can the impact we produce in this world be less? So that's sort of my my motto, my preaching.
If everyone would every day when we wake up ask ourselves that, I think world would be a better place. You've seen a lot of world. You lived, studied, worked on 3 continents. How does that inform your art? Does it at all? How do you feel about it?
Oh, it does. It does inform my art in many ways. I think more importantly, it is through the people that I interact with across these different borders that makes me realize that there are a lot of good people out there, right? And who are also addressing these issues, who are trying to make a difference. But I'm very enamored by the natural topographies and terrains and landscapes that you kind of cut across. You see that we're all unified through our bodies and our environment, right? Because everywhere you go, you see similar things and you're reminded of how beautiful this planet is. And so each time I go to a new place, I am inspired by the environment, and I extract elements from that environment, natural environment, that I then plug into my work, either through mark making or through the sculptural forms that I build. I also try to learn from the cultural significance of that environment and see how I can wrap it into the work that I create. So on different levels, environmentally, culturally, socially, I think that I'm always inspired to think differently about how I make work, and it reflects in the outcome of the work in some subtle way or the other.
Well, for conclusion of our conversation, I hope the next one could be without the screens and live, and we can have you here,
Yes.
not just your artwork. Maybe just I touch it again, this piece in flux. What was your core inspiration or message that you were trying to convey with this piece?
Right. So I think the key thing was influx for me means like things are in flux. Everything is always connected. Everything is always changing. The earth as well. There's a lot of changes, a lot of possibilities, a lot of connections and interconnections that are happening at all times. And I wasn't just thinking about it in terms of just the nature and interconnections. I was also thinking about the human connections, the material connection, the spatial connections, and how all these things are all intermingled. And I see it as a cycle. Art is not just an isolated event. It is something that we all have to be part of. And again, I don't know if I told the exhibition team that it was okay for people to touch my materials and for them to really engage with it and have conversations with it. But for me, the cycle is not complete until all of those things happen. And so I'm thinking about what are the ways that art can really permeate the human experience in a way that changes perceptions or shifts perceptions to a positive end, or maybe to a negative end too, but at least it challenges us to think. And so I think that was at the center of what I was thinking. Influx is everything is in flux, and the environment is in flux, and we need to really find ways of having that back and forth conversation, that sort of like cross-pollination across materials, across experience, across space, in order to elevate how we think about this problem, that it cannot just be peripheral. It has to really go deeper to make a difference. And so I think that was what I was particularly trying to point to. And that was what led me to think about that theme, influx.
So we invite everybody that is going to see it in the future to come close, to touch it, to interact with it in any way possible, with respect, of course. Nnenna, thank you so much for chatting with us. It was a very, very nice conversation. I hope we all learned something, and hope to see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanja, and to all your team for inviting me. I'm so honored. I've never shown in Slovenia before, so I was very excited with the opportunity. And I think this exhibition is doing wonderful things. I've seen some of the works and very delighted to be part of it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So enjoy the rest of your vacation, if I was informed correctly. And all of our viewers, I invite you to 2 more talks tomorrow, Wednesday, same time, same space, with Habiba Nourose. Her work is exhibited in Kranj, and later also it will be shown in Nova Gorica. And on Thursday, you're welcome to join in on a conversation with Adrian Colburn, also here in the Zoom space. That's all for today. See you on BN. Bye.